This video will be a review, finally, at long last, of the system powering Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars Roleplaying. I won't be looking with too much specificity at Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, or Force and Destiny. I'll be looking at the system. If you haven't played and you're curious, if you've been hearing a lot of things or watching a lot of other reviews and are curious, that's what this review is for, to explain what it is, how easy it is to start playing it, how it might compare to an older game like West End Games D6, the cost of startup, what's actually required to play, and finally, my thoughts on its quality as a game. Is it a good game? Those who follow this channel will know that I'm not prone to doing reviews. I don't like them. I don't feel comfortable doing them unless I've played a game for a long time. I don't have a lot of respect for the capsule review that comes from just reading it and saying, I think it'll be okay. And I don't also have a lot of respect for the review that comes after just a few attempts to play it. Games can be fun. Groups can be fun. The crossover between a game and a group can create a lot of fun where if one of those things is changed, fun might not exist. I think it takes a long time to know whether a game system delivers its promise. I also think it takes a while to know if your group has expended the effort or has the tools required to understand what that game is actually doing or trying to do. So there's a lot of information, disinformation, misinformation out there about this game. And for those reasons, because my group and I have spent a long time playing it, and we really enjoy it, and we really enjoy sharing it, this review is being made. I hope you'll watch it with me, and I hope it will be of some use. This video is likely to be long, given what all of its goals are. You may want to watch it in pieces, and so I will have title breaks as we go through each of its different sections. The video will also be annotated for extra information density. We'll start this all out with, what is the game really? I think what people are most likely to hear about Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars Roleplaying before they play it is that it has been divided up into 3 core books, and this causes confusion. I think the second thing they would hear is that it uses proprietary dice. I'm going to talk about the dice in a different section. Let's keep focused on specific things in order. So, yes, Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars Roleplaying is divided up into 3 core books, but this does not mean that you need to buy all 3 core books. It doesn't mean that the company is parceling things out in such a way that you can't have a Star Wars experience if you don't have all 3. The fact of the matter is, you can have a Star Wars experience by playing just one. I will go into an explanation of that in a minute. The 3 game lines are Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny. Each one of those game lines is very slowly being supported by supplements that expand the information which is in the core book. I think anybody who has thought about Star Wars with any degree of seriousness in terms of role-playing recognizes the fact that the Star Wars universe, even the parts of it that are represented in just the films, is far too much to have in one book. So whatever publisher, whatever their intentions are, the reality of being able to pack Star Wars into one book at this point in time is an impossibility. It will be a book and supplements. But you can't please all the people all the time. In fact, sometimes it seems like you can't please anybody ever. So what is Fantasy Flight Games doing? Well, from the perspective of the films, you could think of the first release, Edge of the Empire, as Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. This is the book to get if you're interested in playing Star Wars as it was first introduced to us. This is out in the Outer Rim. People are desperate. People are disillusioned with the Empire, but they're not actively fighting it. They're just hoping it leaves them alone. They come from all manner of different backgrounds, and they can get involved in all sorts of different things, including taking the fight to the Empire if they so desire, or, living on the wrong side of the law and hoping that they don't get caught. They can even be exiles, Force users, hiding out and hoping that no one discovers their special nature. There is an awful lot of game packed into Edge of the Empire, and in fact, it's designed for long-term campaign play. Of the 3 games, it is the most open. The games get progressively narrower in focus as you go along. Edge of the Empire, as I said a few moments ago, is the Star Wars game of the 3. Now, what then is Age of Rebellion? Age of Rebellion is a 100% compatible, mechanically, Star Wars role-playing game, which is thematically focused on playing agents of the Rebel Alliance, whether that be soldiers or political agitators or spies or what have you. This is the game about the Rebel Alliance. But what does that mean? It doesn't just mean that the character options, the skills, and the gear are themed toward the Rebel Alliance. It's not simply that. The gameplay, not the mechanics, but the gameplay, the way the game shapes the atmosphere at the table, is different from Edge of the Empire. This draws upon the idea of more mission-oriented play, that a campaign would be put together from the successful completion of missions over time, as you do your duty to the Rebel Alliance. Mechanically, the game is structured around becoming more and more valuable as an agent of the Rebel Alliance. Force and Destiny is the most narrow of the 3 games. It's focused exclusively on the Force. Characters in that game are all Force sensitive. The players have all decided they want to play people who are able to use the Force. That game is focused on the internal struggle between the light side and the dark side that Force sensitives experience. So it's set up mechanically to represent that conflict inside and represent the current moral standing of the character as they deal with that conflict. This is about finding answers, learning lost lore, going on quests, standing up as an individual to the powers of darkness which seek to take you down. Each of the games is thematically different. Each of the games has a different mechanical focus to produce a different atmosphere of play at the table. And each one of the games is 100% compatible mechanically. So you can take any particular element from any particular game and drop it into another game. And this includes the narrative mechanics which affect that atmosphere and mood that we talked about. What are these mechanics? In Edge of the Empire, this is represented as obligation. These are the things which are pulling at your character from the outside and causing them stress, strain, worry on the inside. The things that keep them up at night, the things that they want to accomplish and worry that they can't. This is Han Solo's debt to Jabba the Hutt. Han Solo's fear of the dread bounty hunter Boba Fett being on his tail. He's got to act or he will die. This is the mechanic that sees Han Solo desperately wanting to stay with Luke, his kind of adopted younger brother or a figure to which he's becoming a mentor, and with Leia, someone for whom he's developing romantic attachment. He wants to be the person who is becoming a leader in the Rebel Alliance, and yet every day that passes, that debt hanging over his head is driving him crazy. Age of Rebellion, on the other hand, uses a mechanic called duty. And duty is the sense in the character of what they can and should be providing to this cause that they so firmly believe in. The cause is the alliance against the Empire. This might be something like recruitment or inciting rebellion or, gathering up military materiel to use against the Empire. So many different options, so many different shades of duty are represented. And this game, through its duty mechanic, is both pushing characters to excel, supporting them in their dark times in combat or under strain, and rewarding them for success. The more they are able to seek out opportunities to fulfill that duty to the Rebel Alliance, the greater their rank and reputation will be within the Alliance, the greater their ability will be to requisition and control its precious resources and apply them for greater and greater ends. It's not like Edge of the Empire at all, and yet you can take Rebel characters and mix them up with Edge of the Empire characters with no conflict. Finally, if your group is interested in focusing specifically on the Force to the exclusion of the rest of the Star Wars universe, they have offered a game in which you can do that, Force and Destiny, where the Force is explored with a great deal of granularity and detail, down to the internal moral struggle within the character, with a great number of options for Force powers and the ability to fall to the dark side and seek redemption. Can you play a Force user in the other two games? Of course you can. It's Star Wars. Do you play with the same amount of detail? No, not as a default. But if your group wants to bring a Force user of that level of detail into one of the other two games, you have that option because they are, as I've said over and over, 100% mechanically compatible. But there is no reason to have to do that. There is a ton of Force ability available in the two games as they are. So that is an overview of how the core books are divided and some of what makes them distinct, how they actually play at the table. Now, I mentioned that they were thematically different, and as my examples indicate, this is very much a true thing. But this is not to restrict what you can do in terms of forcing you to buy another game in order to be able to do something else, but it's again aimed at the newcomer and at presenting the material clearly to the experienced gamer. Unlike just an encyclopedia of options, like a toolkit, like you might find with GURPS or RuneQuest's 6th edition or whatever else, BRP, this game gives you the example campaign. Right? All the options of things you've seen in the films are present. With Edge of the Empire, think of it as Episode 4. With Age of Rebellion, think of it as parts of Empire and parts of Return of the Jedi. And with Force and Destiny, think of it as parts of Empire and parts of Return of the Jedi, but different parts. So they give you a very clear starting point, which is very customizable, open to a lot of different things. Right? It makes it so that you can get the game, read the game, and play the game, not get the game, think about, well, what am I going to allow? What am I going to disallow? How am I going to interpret this? No. You get it, you learn it, you play it. Easy. So that's what Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars Role-Playing actually is. But there's more! When is it set, you might ask? As we mentioned earlier, the expanded universe, the 6, now 7 Star Wars films give us an incredible amount of stuff to have to deal with. Well, these games are set immediately after the destruction of the first Death Star. This is an era which people know very well, and it also puts you in the driver's seat for how the rest of your game is going to go. You're at the beginning, right? These things exist. This is the Star Wars universe that we're familiar with from the first film, and now the rest is up to you. They put the rest of the timeline in your hands. It's kind of nice. It's focused on heroes, meaning it's focused on non-Imperial characters. The game recognizes what its genre really is, which is not something that everybody does. It understands the genre as space fantasy, not as science fiction. Now that means some things. It means that the villain, the real villain of the piece, is an actual villain. It's okay in this genre for the villain to be evil. Yes, they might have reasons. Yes, they might seem, in some ways, sympathetic. But at the end of the day, this is a universe where it's possible for there to be good standing up against evil. In that context, the Empire is not misunderstood. It's not an ambiguous entity out there doing some good and a little evil. The Empire is an evil force which needs to be opposed, which means that casting the rebels in the light of being terrorists or insurgents or something like that is also inappropriate. They are the good guys against the villainy of the Empire. Likewise, carrying this forward into the Force, falling to the dark side is not something that's cool and gives you access to cool powers. Falling to the dark side is a character failure as a result of character flaws. And there's some rich role-playing opportunities provided in the game for seeking redemption. Reveling in being a dark side user and causing havoc throughout the Star Wars universe is taking the game in a different direction. You're certainly able to do that, but the game itself is not written from that perspective. Rising to the light side, on the other hand, is something to which the game is oriented. It's something to be respected, and someone who has become a paragon of the light is not calcified and hidebound, but are instead open to empathy and understanding. For those of us who love Star Trek as much as we love Star Wars, this can be a difficult switch to flip in the mind, recognizing that there are such significant differences in the basic underpinnings of the universe. In Star Trek, it's totally acceptable for the villain to simply be misunderstood. But in Star Wars, the villain is villainous because they are evil. And this is something that needs to be understood if you want to get in tune with that genre. If you don't, then this part of the discussion has been moot. But just to be clear on what is the game. So to recap the most important point of this section, why it's divided up into 3 different games is to provide newcomers and experienced hands alike with a template of the system in action for a very specific foundation of play. It's easily open to modification with experience, either as a newcomer who has played through a campaign or 2 and now wants to make some alterations, or right out of the box by someone who's been playing for a long time. Okay, that's what it is. Now, after all of that, let's talk about something a little bit more fun. Let's talk about speed of play. I would like to say that the game is very, very fast and it's very, very light and you can just pick it up like that. I would like to say that. But for a couple of reasons, I can't. One is that based on the surveys that I've done, and I've actually done some surveys in different role-playing groups, people are intimidated by this game. This is a large game. It's the 400-page, full, glossy, text-heavy kind of reading experience. And people seem to convince themselves before reading it that it's going to be hard to understand. And there is a pretty common habit out there of jumping around inside a role-playing game rulebook because they don't really need to be read from start to finish. Some people read the combat chapter first, and some people read the fiction first, and some people read the example of play first and so on, and I tend to jump straight to the dice mechanic explanation. But that does seem to be a culture within the hobby of not reading books from cover to cover. Well, that can create problems. That can affect your speed of play. So the recommendation I'm going to drop right into the middle of this review is that when you get the book and you decide to play, just start at the beginning and read all the way through. You'll find that the book is divided up into chapters, and those are very specific chapters which are designed to be read linearly from the beginning of the chapter to the end of the chapter. In fact, you'll find that one of the things that affects speed of play is rules lookups. Rules lookups are pretty easy in terms of knowing which chapter to go to, but then get a little difficult within the chapter because they're designed to simply be read from start to finish. So, making notes of some specific pages you think you might want to reference can be handy. That's the first barrier to speed. The second barrier to speed is that there are some slightly complex things going on. This is not a game that's so complex we could compare it to Shadowrun, but it's certainly more complex than something like Cthulhu Dark or Lady Blackbird or Lasers and Feelings. It has fewer charts than a Shadowrun sort of game. It has fewer rules invocations, has fewer cross-references. It might be similar to a game of BRP, basic role-playing like Call of Cthulhu. It might be similar to a game of Fate or Ubiquity, but more complicated than anything that gets billed as Rules Light. Right? There are things that you need to know. However, the game has been refined to maximize the speed it can have. And if you give it some time, if it becomes one of those games that you play regularly, you will not, I think, feel unduly burdened by slowness. And I don't want to say that the game is slow. It's not. Everything that could be done to ramp up the speed of the system has been done. But let's look at some of the things which make it not the fastest game out there. The first is that it's a die pool game, which means that you are assembling different dice based on your skills and based on your character's physical characteristics, and that there will be adjudication of those dice results. This takes a little bit more time than some dice pool games because it's collaborative. It exists around the table. So the game master will be contributing dice, the currently active character will be contributing dice, and people who are in the scene that can assist will also be contributing dice. Once the pool is collected and the scene established, the intent of the roll has been framed, then the roll is made. Then the mechanic itself, we won't go into it specifically. I've got other videos for that if you're interested. Once the roll is made, it's a match and cancel, or basically a sorting roll, where opposed symbols will cancel each other out, and what's left gets used to narrate the result. Now, in the beginning, there'll be some hesitation or awkwardness. This goes away. I'll have videos later in this clip which will demonstrate exactly what I mean by that. But because of its nature, this always means that everyone is engaged around the table, everyone's contributing to every roll, and that by its nature means that there are fewer independent rolls, there are fewer things as just dice hitting the table and the player stating a number. Right? So it's not the fastest type of dice pool out there, it's not the slowest type of dice pool out there, and it is a very satisfying type of dice pool for gamers who really get into role play and really get into the idea of an emergent story. So it's of moderate complexity and moderate speed no matter who's playing, and the value adds it has by its nature tends to downplay for a group that likes it that one step of slowness. So, speed of play. Now, the support. It's a typical role-playing system in all other regards. If you take the dice pool away, what's left is a very typical role-playing game system, but one that's been maximized for speed. What do I mean by that? Well, when you roll to hit, there is no commensurate roll for defense on the other being's part, on the target's part. You roll to hit, that determines that you have hit and are now going to attempt to apply damage. Damage has been standardized, so you're not rolling to see how much damage, and they're not rolling to minimize your damage. You have an opportunity to hit. That means you apply a numerical figure, which you already know, from which their innate resistance, which might come from armor, for example, gets deducted, and the remainder gets applied as wounds. Very fast. There's minimal rolling to maximal effect. Right? You don't roll nearly as often as you do in other games, which means that although the individual roll is of medium speed, the amount of time spent rolling is actually less. And the amount of time being engaged with your character, being engaged with the scene, being engaged with getting things done, interacting with the friends that you're playing with, there's a lot more of that going on. Everything has a simple threshold for effect, from injury, from strain, effective wounds, the qualities of items that might activate in special situations like critical hits and that sort of thing, the conditions that apply to you like blindness or fatigue or being staggered. All of these are simple thresholds. When you exceed it, it activates. So that is also very fast. And character design itself is very minimalist, with very far-reaching role-playing effects and with very far-reaching effects that increase the speed with which the system can play out. So it feels like the system designer recognized that there's a maximum speed with which any single roll could be resolved, and it's not as fast as a single die roll, look and recognize what you rolled system might be, or a more typical dice pool system might be. And so every measure was taken to speed up the rest of the system, and it works. The system itself is organized into two distinct phases of operation or administration. There's what is referred to as narrative time, and there's what is referred to as structured time. Narrative time are all those periods of play where it does not matter what the turn-by-turn action sequence is. Situations that are outside of a combat, outside of a chase or escape scene. Here, the game master and the players are given the greatest amount of latitude for their narrations. There are rules such as obligation, rules such as strain, conditions like being stunned or suffering from a critical injury. These things still have mechanical bite, mechanical weight, but how they are interpreted is more about the flow of the story than applying the system and set statistics or set results according to a hard and fast rule. That's what structured gameplay is for, and that is the next aspect. These two things work in concert with each other. Whereas in combat, rolling a triumph, you can access a chart to get clear guidance on to what degree the narration should be affected by that triumph. Outside of structured play, the rolling of a triumph, which might be part of the only roll that's going to happen for weeks, days, or months of game time, well, you are given much more leeway in what that means. There isn't going to be another roll 3 seconds later to represent the next phase of combat. Not necessarily. So, the system requires that the game master and the players understand this distinction and are willing to work with the system in structured time to produce exciting, fair narrations in tune with what we see in a Star Wars film, and outside of structured time are willing to do the exact same thing, but improvise what those effects will be so that we get the connections from moments of tension and combat and structured time together in a good appropriate flow that matches the characters, that brings character out, that brings the underlying themes of the story and the universe out, and provides people with the sense of being in Star Wars. Moving on from the concept of basic speed of play, let's look at the ease of play. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is a game which is trying to be as easy to use as possible for an experienced gamer and serve as a complete introductory experience for the beginner. So, what have they done to make the game easy to play? Well, there are themed starting points which aid in the formulation of your first campaign or your get-to-know-you game experiences like one-shots and the like. If your group wants to, play rebel starfighter pilots blowing up TIE fighters and dodging around Star Destroyers and things like that, then you pick up Age of Rebellion and you simply play. If you'd like to play characters like Han Solo and Chewie, or like bounty hunters looking for desperate criminals on the rim, or if you're looking to play a character like Luke Skywalker, an Edge of the Empire might be the game for you. So these themed starting points make it very easy to get into the game. The way the games are written handle the rest. There are charts, there are pictures, there's clear organization, everything is referenced. If you wind up using more of the core books, then all the system information is in exactly the same place in each book. So, it's very, very easy to get up and go or try something different. There's mechanical support for a specific playstyle. So less of the onus of creating a specific or desired atmosphere falls on a novice GM's shoulders, or falls on the shoulders of just one person at the table. The game can pick up the strain of creating that particular mood, that drive and need to be successful in the military-oriented or mission-oriented campaign of Age of Rebellion, or the push and pull of those obligations, right? Those family obligations, those debts that need to be paid, and those fears that you're running away from. Those aspects of Edge of the Empire are brought to life and given some mechanical weight, both narratively and mechanically, by the system. There's mechanical support of the specific genre through the dice, through the way the chance of success is determined, through the likelihood of complication happening, and through the offense versus defense balance within the game. So what do I mean by that? This is a game where the intent is to play heroes in the Star Wars universe, and so the dice, in terms of pure success versus failure, are slightly balanced towards success. Not so much that it feels like a game geared towards surviving lengthy dungeon crawls, but more than a game which seems to want you to perish. So there's a slight bias towards success, very slight. As a counterpoint to this, there is also the advantage and threat aspect of a roll. And this is slightly balanced towards threat, meaning complication. So in the purest sense, any given roll, you might be expecting a success, but with complications, which automatically is already making you feel like you're in a Star Wars movie, and from time to time pays off massively with the phenomenal success that the hero sometimes strikes against the enemy, or the disastrous soul-crushing failure that comes at certain points. The mechanics guide and support you in in improvising and narrating and resolving action in this way, so that every scene ends up feeling like Star Wars. I mentioned earlier it's got a strong focus on teaching newcomers how to role play, how to evoke the feeling of Star Wars, how to import whatever expanded universe knowledge they might like, how to manage their campaign resources, how to improvise, and how to manage a system. In terms of games out there, good for beginner role players, it's very difficult to top this one. Now, there is a history of people starting with other games, which you would have to swim against. But from the perspective of young people who've just been filled with the excitement of watching episode 7 and they would love more in some way, and they are creative people who would be suited for getting into role-playing games. Imagine the amount of joy and fun they can get up to without the stress which might come along with games which have a longer history, games which are often written more toward adults, and games which are not written with the technical clarity that these games are. Now, even though it has this strong focus on the beginning gamer, it's still extremely useful for experienced gamers. If nothing else, it can help you to assess and modify any existing habits or methods which you have, which might interfere with that, Star Wars feeling, with evoking the sense of Star Wars. It gives you solid support for whatever it is you want to do with the game. It works like a template, right? Very easy to modify, very easy to adapt. And so if you would prefer to run it in a different era, or if you'd prefer to use different species, as an experienced gamer, it's just not hard to do that at all. So for ease of play, as much as people say this is a complicated or daunting system, those feelings are very transient, very temporary. 1 session, 2 sessions, and people are really rolling with the game. Reading the book from cover to cover, and people are getting it. They're just a little nervous about, can I do it? The game gets high marks for me for ease of play. Part of what makes me give it that rating is the game's nature of collaboration. Building dice pools, character creation, the creation of the group, the assignment of group resources, the way that characters interact in play, the way that synergy exists between the different careers and the different specializations within the careers. All of these things encourage the group to constantly be engaged, not only with their own character's perspective on the scene, but with the scene and each other and the game master. And one more aspect that allows this to flourish is that the game master is not solely responsible to carry the weight of all the rules. The way that characters work, the way that their skills and talents are presented to them, enables them, empowers them to be aware of the rules that pertain to those characters and those situations. So the game master is enabled, is freed to focus on more of the things that are actually their responsibility, and less on being the source of all rules knowledge, which is fantastic. So in terms of getting play going in this game, the group comes together. The group makes characters. The group defines the group of characters and how they interact with each other. And as their characters grow in ability and experience, everyone's knowledge of the rules grows, and everyone's familiarity with how the narrative will be structured grows, and their comfort with the dice grows, and it becomes a process that goes all the way around the table, not just outward from behind the screen. So, ease of play, it's hard to top. Now, I can hear what some of you are thinking or maybe saying to the screen. What about the dice? Those dice are crazy. I can't possibly use those. Someone could show you this bewildering array of dice and say, this game is too complicated to play. Well, all games feel like that at the beginning. Maybe you're desperately fighting back against a enraged Wookiee.
And that's a lot of success. I'll take those two out, that out, and I have 5 successes and 5 advantages.
Hoping to trick security.
God!
Oh wait,
That's awesome.
You did it.
That's really good. Just one threat.
With just a threat, that's
You
fine.
want a threat. You want everything to follow you. There we go.
Trying not to crash into the mouth of a lava monster while an assassin droid tries to shoot you in the back of the head.
You crashed the ship.
Wow.
Well, it just means I can't do that maneuver.
You got eaten by the monster.
Yeah.
Oh, 5 despairs.
Wait, hold on.
He's like, I don't know how to do it. Just went straight up. I hope he left the intercom on and I hear this. I'm like, what are you doing to my ship?
So 2 failures, but 3 advantages.
Or nervously anticipating that shot to the back of the head.
Oh, wow.
Just a failure, though.
Okay, so we've got
I love
failure and threat, cancel, and this just becomes a triumph.
Right. And those all go away.
And that all goes away.
So it's just a triumph.
What at first seemed like something that was hard to learn becomes just a part of how play is expressed. It becomes a tool like any other. The dice offer so much, not only in the way they bring the whole group together to see what the results are, but in how they can guide play, offer inspiration, absolve the game master of some of the guilt that comes along with providing difficult scenes to players. All kinds of spin-off effects as you roll the dice across the table. The dice add to the fun. If you look at this sample character sheet, you'll notice green and yellow dots. This represents the number of dice and the type of dice used in the dice pool for determining success or failure in a skill. The number of dice is defined by the largest number between the characteristic or the skill. So if I had a 4 intellect and a 2 skill, I'd be rolling 4 dice and upgrading 2 of those to a higher value die. When it's time for me to roll, the Game Master will add different dice of a different color, and they will represent the level of challenge or difficulty. All right, so I'm here with one of the members of our face-to-face Star Wars group. This is David, and David is one of the people who has both been a player in the group and one of the game masters in the group. So the question I have for him is, what was it like to start playing the game over a year ago now? And then later, what was it like to go through the book with the intention of running it?
I think starting the game and just, looking at the character sheets, I found that building the character was fairly easy. It was fairly simple, as the stats, like the derived stats, were pretty easy to come up with. Each species having its set attributes, and then you can just manipulate those based on experience. I like the fact that you didn't have to roll, and it was that random-esqueness of the character wasn't really there. You got to really build what you kind of wanted to start. In hindsight, I probably would have built my character slightly different, but I feel like the character that I've created works really well.
What would you have done differently? That's a good point to bring up.
I think going forward, I would have maybe sunk more experience points into the attributes, because I find that the attributes are a lot more important, and then as you progress, the skills come naturally. Like, I feel like more as an actual person, you probably naturally have a good basis of attributes, and as you learn things, you get better at those particular things. So I think I would have just weighted myself a little bit more towards the attributes and let the skills come a little bit later. So that's what I probably would have done differently. But it was pretty straightforward. The only complicated thing was obligation, and that was the part that, because it's really a story mechanic, that I didn't quite get as far as building it. But I thought by creating a background of my character, the obligation just kind of came with it. And it kind of naturally progressed out of what my backstory was. And as a GM, I think you did a good job of kind of weaving that through as it went through.
Right, it's still pushing the story.
Yeah.
So many months later.
Yeah, and I think that's an issue that as a GM that's trying to fit in obligation with 5 characters, or was it five player characters at the time, was a little much. Once we got into the game, rolling the dice, especially when you're just starting, it's pretty basic. You're not rolling a ton of dice compared to a year later, where there's certain rolls that you've got to use 2 hands to roll several die. But at the beginning, it's pretty simplistic, and then it's just trying to match. You're just matching symbols. It's not anything where you're worrying about does this number beat that number, things like that. And I found that idea was simple. Like, the first game was slow, learning the different rules and learning that when to do a roll, things like that. But as we progressed through, I thought even at the end of that first session, we kind of had a good grasp of when do we roll things, and we could progress forward as it went through. So overall experience of that first session to especially a year later, the learning curve is huge. I think you learn a lot in the first couple sessions, and then it just keeps going. There's still things I think I learn even a year later as things progress, as new modules come in. But it's all fairly, once you get that basic knowledge down, it's just building on that particular knowledge, and it works really well. Everything I think is pretty well laid out in that kind of sense.
Right.
So once I guess I played maybe 9 months to almost a year by the time I did my own campaign.
I guess so.
So for my own campaign, going back through and looking at a lot of the different rules that maybe I didn't know the basis behind some of the rules. But even as a player character, I felt like the transition to go from player character to the GM was actually fairly easy. I'd already, watching someone interpret the dice roll was extremely helpful in being a GM. But I think even if you're a rookie GM, like if you've never done it before and never even played, I think the books do a really good job of explaining how to interpret the dice rolls. And I even felt going back and reading that section was helpful for me as a GM. So when it came down to, okay, so let's see what's rolled, what are my options? And I guess being fairly well versed in the Star Wars universe, it's very easy to kind of figure out how you want things to progress and to progress forward in your story. I feel like compared to what I've played in the past, I feel like story is story, and everything is about a story progressing to a particular point. So if you have a good idea of like where your story wants to lead, and your player characters will either take you there or not take you there, and based on the dice roll, I think is a very interesting journey as both a player character and a GM.
Right.
That you never know what to expect. So I think for me, planning wise, I think I planned less than I did when I've actually GM'd other modules, and I liked that kind of idea. Like I thought, oh, okay, well, let's see where the players kind of go. At the same time, it can be very scary because you're like, well, what happens now? So there was a couple parts that I felt like that, and once I did my next section, I had a much better grasp of how things were kind of working at different points.
How much you might have to make up.
Yeah, how much I had to make up, and then having stuff in my back of the mind that, I don't have to make up right on the spot. And I think depending on how good you are at coming up and improvising makes a big difference. And I think a lot of people, if you're in this genre, like improvising is something you're probably fairly good at, or at least you've had experience with it, whether as a player or a GM or whatever module you might be playing. So
that's one cool thing that the dice do to help, let's say, budding improvisational GMs, is they tell you that whatever it is that you're improvising, it's advantageous or
Right.
it's threatening.
Exactly, and so you're like, well, I have 4 success. Well, clearly you were quite successful in whatever action you're doing. So then it's on a scale in your head. Okay, well, clearly if he was, trying to jump from one place to another and he has 4 success, well, clearly he made it no problem.
Right.
If he 1 success and then threats, so maybe he, just grappled on and then maybe is, hanging precariously from a ledge that stormtroopers are probably shooting at or something like that. So I find that particular thing very good. There's some different rules that I know as a player and as a GM that I still haven't grasped. A lot of the space combat, more so with the single fighter, like X-wing TIE fighter battles, I'm not as fluid with, that I would have to look in the book, little things like that.
Right.
That I feel like I'm not 100% sure on, but I mean that just takes experience, and we haven't had as much of that
Right.
combat in our games. So had we been playing Rebel, the
Age of
Rebels
Rebellion.
Age of Rebellion a lot more, I think I'd be a lot more comfortable with that particular thing.
How do you find the books as a resource, like organizationally?
The Edge of the Empire, I thought just the core book I thought was great. It's well laid out. It's fairly easy to find particular things. The one thing I find sometimes the weapons confusing, the modding of the weapons, how to make your weapons better, because I think that's one thing as a player character, you're making your character better, but as most thing, you want to kind of make your weapons or get better gear and things like that. And I think some of that I need to look at a little bit more often. And it's in there. It's just something that I haven't really done. And I think actually all of us as players, we just keep forgetting about
Right.
why don't we upgrade our weapons? How do we do that? And it's in there.
It's just easier to run away.
Yeah, it's just easier to run away. Just run away. So, it's in there. It's just something that I don't use as much, and sometimes it's harder to find because it's right at the beginning, and then you have weapon description. So it's not exactly. That's
Right.
the one section I don't like.
I find the chapters are easy to find. Everything's categorized within the chapters
Right.
well, but when you're looking for something specific with any kind of time pressure, there's
It's-
page flipping that happens.
Yeah, I found that in flipping through pages trying to find the exact thing. That's where little sticky notes for where's the critical hit chart for
Right.
this particular thing, like whether it's the starfighter or just regular combat.
Page 216.
Yeah, exactly. and you memorize them now after a year of playing, but at the beginning that was an awkward.
Yeah.
Quickly trying to find that particular thing. What do you do with how can you spend threats and advantages? Like those couple of pages they're not hidden. You can find them, but they're hidden within that particular book chapter.
Right. And they're helpfully presented on the GM screen.
Right.
Which wasn't very convenient for us to use in the place that we play, but
Right.
for other groups it would be.
That it would be quite easy. I guess and for the GM that would be well laid out. Other than that, I thought the book was quite good. The for the GM stuff that I found at the ends, quite good. The extra campaign that they have, like sample campaign, was a good read through for me before I was actually GMing to have an idea of this is the things that they had, little options of various scenarios that could happen that people could follow, characters, things like that. I thought was well done. I think overall, and visually the books are quite amazing. I really like the way they're laid out and just how they're done.
All right. Excellent. Thanks.
No problem.
All right, those who've seen earlier recaps, like they recognize Dave, will also recognize Paul. He plays, unsurprisingly, Captain Paul Hyland. And the question for him is the same. When we first started playing the game, how hard was it?
At first, it was daunting because I had never seen a dice mechanic like that before. and I got a run through of this symbol means this and this symbol means this, but if there's two of these symbols, they go away, and then this symbol means this and that can mean this. And that was really confusing, I would say, for the very first session, because my previous game session has always been games that follow a format of Dungeons and Dragons that have a very specific number code that you follow, and it's like this number means hit, as opposed to a narrative dice where it can be interpreted several ways. It took, I would say, about 2 sessions before that was no longer a problem. I guess maybe an extra session to just remember which symbols matched up with what. But I sort of got the flow of, I'm looking for these successes means I achieve something with benefits of the advantages, or maybe there's a threat which could come down the line, and triumphs and despairs. So I would say basically 2 sessions to understand the game mechanic, 3 to really get used to what you are looking for in a role, and then possible effects of what can be done with the outcome, as opposed to roll, hit, this damage, move on.
Our sessions, how long would you say they are on average?
On average, roughly 2 hours. We've had some longer ones and then maybe some shorter ones, but I would say a good session is about 2 hours. Usually with a very, very clear stopping point, usually left on a cliffhanger. And so if we reach that point in the story, that's a good place to stop. We'll cut it short. If maybe, there's just one extra thing to do in our mission, we'll extend it to the end of that. We end it around 2 hours wherever there is a good cutoff point.
Okay. So compared to experience with games like D&D, do you find you're rolling more, rolling less?
I feel like that is not a constant. There are some sessions where you roll more. We're not in combat every session, and I don't know how other groups play, but our group is very, very cautious. We've grown attached to our characters and have brushed in with death because we did not think out our strategy. So we actually have gotten the case of running and strategizing. So there are some weeks where we avoid conflict, and I think those are weeks we roll less but role play more. And then there are weeks where we're infiltrating a base. There's a guy around every corner. We've got to hack the security system. We got to make this deception check or perception check. And I think so. I don't think it's every session has the same number of rolls. It depends on where you are. It's a little bit more liberal in the storytelling.
Okay. Now, what was it like then, or how does the experience of being a game master compare to the experience of being a player?
It was frightening at first. I was a little hesitant to do it. I thought maybe I'd be overwhelmed, and the nature of the narrative dice I wouldn't be able to think of, okay, well, you had 3 successes and this many advantages, but then there was this, one thing here. And I wouldn't be able to think quickly enough of the story. So I feel like I almost over-prepped. And now going back, if I was to play again, I don't think that's necessary. I think it's actually quite simple. And as long as you know the scenario your characters are in, whatever they're dealing with, and what rolls up, it's very easy to kind of interpret what would happen in that instance. If somebody is trying to, I like to think of on Endor Han Solo. I can hotwire this door. He rolls a failure, or maybe even a despair, more doors close. That makes perfect sense. That not only did he not open the door, but if it was a despair, something worse happened. Right. Whereas if he had rolled a success, the door would open, something like that. It's actually really easy to interpret it. If you don't overwhelm yourself, don't try to think like you need to know everything that's happening in this story. Focus on the setting and where your characters are and how they fit in little chunks. Think of it as little episodic moments. And I would say maybe about 25 minutes. I was a little panicky the first 20, 25 minutes of my session, and after that, it kind of just went smoothly, I hope.
Yeah, it was cool.
So,
we had a lot of fun with it. Yeah. So then, dealing with the book, you're using Age of Rebellion.
I have Age of Rebellion.
Right.
I have, yes.
Yeah.
But I've read the Edge of the Empire book as well.
All right. So how easy was it to use? Or how hard was it to use?
It's actually surprisingly easy. It doesn't read like a novel, but Chapters are clear. It really, I've heard people who have a lot of problems. They're like, well, I don't really understand how this works. Or, I don't really understand how this works. All the books, even though Edge of the Empire and Age of Rebellion, and I haven't seen The Force and Destiny, but they have a whole lot of different aspects to it. Every single one of the books actually clearly displays the general things you need to know with charts about lists of maneuvers, when you can do them, how combat works, how equipment works, how this works, how that works. It's all in the book, and if you just really go chapter by chapter, all the information's there. When I was prepping my game, the most helpful things were I wanted to have a lot of vehicles that are not very common in Star Wars. I wanted tracked vehicles and walking vehicles and stuff like that, just to make it a little bit more exciting. And honestly, I just flipped to the vehicle section, and everything about their hit points and the damage and the weaponry they use. If you go into the enemies list, it's there. If you go into the maneuvers list for whoever your rivals are, don't let your comfort with another game, such as D&D, which seems to be the most popular, but another game, make this seem like it's too heavy of a task. Before I ever played Edge of the Empire, all my experience came from D&D and the like games. And I think now that I've really, put some time into this, I prefer this style better because it tells a better story. D&D is really good about the numbers, but I like to role play, and I like to feel my character and make the choices of my character. And I haven't played a game that allows this for you to be a part of a story or tell a story better than this because of the narrative dice and the nature of the game.
Cool. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.
Talking about how easy a system is to learn or to use is really very subjective, as I hope the inclusion of my two fellow gamers' points of view on learning the system, becoming a player in the system, becoming a game master in the system, demonstrates. These two people started playing the game at the same time that I did. We've played it together for the same amount of time. We have differing points of view on how easy it is to learn, how fast we accomplish something. It's definitely something to keep in mind when you wade through all the reviews out there. Whether it's combat, whether it's negotiation over prices or agreements, whether it's the use of the Force, the system's speed, sharing of responsibility, and ultimately its modularity, all work to enable, at the point of creating the actual description, the actual narration of the scene, both the sense of Star Wars and that sense of speed and excitement, of risk and threat and danger and heroism and triumphant success and terrible despair that we see in the films. The learning process is one where potential game masters and players must recognize what the films look like, feel like, what sort of subject matter is represented, and then intentionally looking at the mechanics as tools to make that happen. You can see in many places online questions like, can I run Star Wars with this? Or would that be good for Star Wars and things? A group with intent could take a lot of different games, a lot of different systems, and run Star Wars with them. The better they know that game, the more likely they are to be able to do that. There are some very fortunate companies who've been lucky enough to be given the opportunity to give us the official Star Wars game. West End Games was the first. They gave us the D6 system, which they modified and harnessed from Ghostbusters, and it was great. It was fun. Some other games appeared in between, and now we have Fantasy Flight Games, Star Wars Roleplaying. This particular version of the game has had the opportunity to look back on the previous versions of the game and see what effect the mechanics had, what effect the presentation had, what effect the choice of content had. They were able to look at all of that, bring it in with their experience as a designer of many different types of game. Card games, board games, role-playing games, miniatures combat games. How rules are presented in all these different types of games are different, and they have very specific effects on their readership. And this is one more thing which tends to be missed about Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars, and one more thing which makes it great for beginners and quick and easy to grasp for experienced players. Unlike many games on the market, which may not have a rigorous regularity to the usage of terms throughout the entirety of the rulebook, that is not something you can expect from Fantasy Flight Games. In other words, this is a role-playing game which has very precise terminology that you'll find in a well-written miniatures combat game. There's not a lot of room for interpretation where the rules stick. At the same time, the system is written to encourage narrative freedom. They're saying, generally speaking, the power does this and applies to these things. How do you want to use it? Right? A criticism that can be leveled at the game is in how it portrays the vastness of the Star Wars universe. From the point of view of someone who had never seen Star Wars, who might be handed this game and say, hey, let's play this, can the book prepare them to do that without watching the films? I would have to say no. And so, wonderfully, you would be encouraged, stimulated, motivated to go out and watch the movies, make your own decisions, and get into the game that way. I don't think the game even attempts to be that sort of gazetteer that can say, this is the source of all Star Wars knowledge. And I think sometimes in some reviews it gets tagged unfairly for trying to do something it's not trying to do. That's something, quite frankly, it could never succeed in. Now, supplements do exist to expand the universe. They come in different types. There are career source books which expand the viewpoint of the career, which inform the game master and the players of the varying perspectives from those careers, gives game masters tips and tools about how to incorporate those careers successfully into a campaign, and often provide things like additional gear and story hooks and so on. Useful, but not necessary. If you're a beginner, these source books take on more of a necessary nature, as it is from these that you will move through your beginner status and toward an intermediate status, more experienced. It's fine. That's what they're for. For a more experienced gamer, for a gamer who's played every Star Wars game out there and many others besides, source books are less necessary. The universe is the same. The system is different. The system is provided for you in the core book. That's what it's for. The core book does provide you with good information for getting going in a specific region, what parts of the galaxy are integral to your search or your mission or your obligation, and so on. They cover the ground they need to cover. They can't cover all the ground that there is. They do not try, and I think that was the right decision. Where most people will end up complaining once they accept this is in the art. Well, the art is fantastic, and it is plentiful. However, there are areas where in the core book you look up this ship, for example, and you go, wow, this is a really cool ship. What does it look like? And no ship is represented in the game, and there may be many reasons for this, dealing with licensing or the availability of artists or whatnot. The game does have a lot of pages, and those pages do have a lot of text. There can't be art everywhere. There are parts where you wonder, why isn't there art here, and yet there is art there? And, you know, different people will be satisfied in different ways by that. Fortunately, we are a very connected generation. If you want to know about a piece of gear or a location or a ship, you can easily find these images on the internet. No review of a Star Wars role-playing game could really call itself in any way complete if it didn't address how the game chooses to address the film's iconic characters and, of course, the Force. Let's start with the characters. To a lesser degree than earlier games did, Fantasy Flight Game Star Wars Roleplaying acknowledges the existence of those iconic characters, the Luke Skywalkers, Darth Vader, the Emperor, and so on. These characters exist. They're out there in the universe. But they are not the focus of the game. Your characters are. To such a degree that from the point that the game starts, the future is open. Right? It's in your hands. Make of it what you will. I like this. We don't find the characters represented in the core book or in the supplements with their stats given in order that you can, go out and tangle with them. They're left in your hands to exist, to appear, to not appear. We do find mention of them. Lords of Nal Hutta will, of course, explain to you Jabba's position in that organization at the time of, the first film, Star Wars. So I like this kind of hands-off approach, which is representative throughout the entire line. What are you going to include from the prequels? What are you going to include from what you know of the future from this point? Right? How are things going to play out? Your characters have every opportunity to get involved, make a difference, and interact. You can be as strict with canon as you like, or as loose as you like. It's nice that you don't have to fight the game on this. It doesn't get in the way in either way. It's not so loose as to not mention or not inform you of what is considered to be canonical, and on the other end, it doesn't restrict you to following a set course. Great. Now, the Force. The Force has been a problem in earlier role-playing games, and this game has benefited from being able to have its designers witness those problems. Are all the problems mitigated? I can't say at this point. We've had one character in our campaign using the Force pretty much from the beginning, and he has seemed pretty satisfied. He's had a very cool character arc through the 2 years of play, and has had his high points and his low points. The dice mechanic is interesting, and it's very scalable, and it allows for a Force user, no matter how powerful they get, to always see ahead of them the opportunity for more power, which can lead to temptation. The way the dice work with their light side points and the null dark points is a very tangible representation of the temptation to reach into that inner core of hatred or fear, ambition or greed, and experience the temptation that the characters in the film do. It's not simply left as a, well, if you do an evil act, you're going to fall to the dark side. It's something that becomes an actual decision in play regularly. I want to move something using the Force power move, and the character concentrates. They take the action to invoke this power. It's working. The object is shaking because they can do it. But you roll the dice. The player rolls the dice and gets nothing but these null points, these dark Force points. If they want to have that object move, they have to recognize that to make it happen, they called on their inner darkness. They called on those negative emotions. They did not have control. They were not in tune with the living force, with the light side of the force. They were instead enforcing their will. And they get the experience of figuring out why that is, how that is, what ramifications will come of that. It's a simple and elegant solution which brings about a lot of powerful role play. It brings about the connection to the character on an internal level that has been missing in other games. I have heard some people online describe what I have just described as a flaw, not a feature of the system. They say, I wanted to use the Force, but I couldn't because I kept getting Dark Force points. If I only have a Force rating of 1, meaning I'm only rolling 1 die, I'm more likely to get Dark Force points, and I can't ever do anything. Quote, can't ever do anything. But I feel that this misses the point. What the dice are showing you is that it is at that point that you're experiencing temptation. Right? This is one of the primary themes of Force use in the Star Wars universe, the fear of falling to the dark side. As an initiate, as a novice, you are at the most dangerous point in your development as a Force user. As you build up experience, as you learn that temptation is going to come again and again and again, you build up this momentum of resisting it. But at the beginning, it's difficult to tell what is the use of the Force and what is drawing upon the strength of the dark side. It makes perfect sense. It fits perfectly in with the films, and it can make for the role-playing experience to be richer. Actual temptation, which has an actual effect on gameplay. I've mentioned this in other videos, but I should add here that the focus on that experience, that temptation, the lure of the dark side, is minimized in Edge of the Empire and Age of Rebellion. It's not a focus of play. The Force user is one of many different characters in that game, and the granularity of its system does not address the actual fall to the dark side. They may be falling, but the game doesn't deal with actually having fallen and needing to seek redemption. If that particular experience is what's interesting to your group, then the focus should be on obtaining Force and Destiny. Now, if you get experience with the game and you feel like adding that in, then the optional purchase of Force and Destiny to add those mechanics in and enrich the experience of Force use in the game is always there.
All right, so our next special guest in this long review is coming to us via the HoloNet. This is Lawrence, and he plays Henry, who you've heard me talk about a lot in recaps. So, Lawrence, my question for you is, what was it like to learn to play this game?
I thought it was actually, to learn how to play it, easy. If you just read all the rules in the books, it should be fine. But to actually learn all the subtle nuances of the game, it's still going on for me. Actually, I still have to take a look at the book, read some of the rules. But yeah, how to actually play the game in its own right, I think, is actually pretty easy.
Right. Now, in, like, accessing the rules, that's for stuff that we use all the time or stuff that we rarely use?
Oh, I mean, like stuff that we rarely use. That's a bit like the stuff that we use all the time. You almost memorize it by the second or third session, I would say. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about who Henry is and what you've had to learn as a player.
Henry is a changing character, I'd say. At the very beginning, he was an ex-stormtrooper, so he was a cold and brutal, very tactical man, but he's slowly going through changes. I think he's becoming less of a brutal person and more of someone who finds mercy. he's also becoming force sensitive, or actually he has become force sensitive, and now he's learning a little bit more about the force. And I think that's part of the reason why he's slowly changing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think he's a very complicated man, let's put it that way.
Right. Famous for great bouts of violence and great periods of mercy.
Yes, exactly. Um, there was that famous beheading scene.
Well, yes.
But I think he's actually moved on. I don't think he would ever do that again at this point in the campaign. So
Well, how did that come about? Was that just you, or was that the game?
I think it was partly me and partly the game. I wanted to actually do it as a player. I wanted to finish the combat and effectively remove the threat, I'd say. But I think that's also part of Henry's character at the time. Like, get the mission done, remove all threats, show no mercy. Basically, was what he was at, what his character and personality was like before transitioning.
Right.
I guess.
What would you say caused the transition?
It was a mix, I'd say. Partly learning the Force, getting in tune with the Force definitely helped him transition a lot. But I would say the other half of it is definitely working with his teammates who have, I think, grown to be family almost to him.
Right.
So he's learned a little bit of compassion, I guess, from them.
Awesome. So then let's talk about learning the Force. We started from our second story with the appearance of Force powers. And Henry, what was it like to be the only person using the Force in a group of 6 people? And
At the very beginning, I thought having Force powers would be like really cool and overpowered, right? But at the very beginning, it wasn't actually like that. Like, just because you're a force sensitive character doesn't mean you can do everything in the game. I'd say you need your other teammates to help you out. My character is very combat driven, but the other elements in the story, for example, the negotiations or the slicing, he would never have gotten past. And you can't use the force for some stuff like that. So I'd say, first of all, at the very beginning, it's very balanced. Actually, still, even now, since every character just levels up, I guess, not technically levels up, but gains experience with you, I think everybody's pretty balanced as well.
right, everybody's got something cool that they can do.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody contributes to the game.
Are the Force powers complicated?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, again, it's just it takes an action to use your force power. You have to have, if you're a light side character, enough force points to spend on that force that you want to do, or force power that you want to use. If you don't have enough, then what I resort to is I have to think on my feet. I have to think of another thing that I can do with that action instead of just letting it go by. Um, if I want to throw a 10-ton truck at them and that's not available because I only have one force light side force die showing, then I'd have to perhaps pull their weapons away from them, which is possible with only one light side point. On the other hand, when only dark side points show, I guess you have to kind of consider whether it's worth it to flip that destiny point and use that dark side point as your power. Whether your character would do that in that situation, I'd say you have to ask yourself first.
Right. So we've gotten Force and Destiny. We've added in its specific morality and conflict mechanics into the game, but that's only been the last few months. Is there a significant difference for you playing a Force user this way?
A significant difference? I can't say there is a huge difference, I'd say. Um, it makes me more aware of my choices, I would say, using the morality scale, I'd say. Um, certain options, I have to think of the repercussions a little bit more, I'd say. And sometimes actually, you as a GM actually pull like I think more moral conflicts in the game than I'm used to, I guess.
Right.
But the way I've been playing hasn't changed that much, I think.
Right. The experience or the look on your face when dark side pips show up on your force dice hasn't changed. It's like, do I give in or do I not give in?
I mean, I'm always tempted, even as a character and as a player. I'd say I'm always tempted if there's no light side force points showing to flip that destiny point and be able to do what I want to do. But again, I don't know. It's you got to ask yourself whether it's worth it to go down a dark path, I guess.
Right on.
Human nature being what it is, all systems out there are written from certain biases or with certain assumptions, not all of which are clearly communicated by the designer to the reader. Not all readers are ready at the point in time in which they read something. They're not ready to interpret what the designer was actually going for. They might not have the experience or the point of view, or they might just be distracted at that time. Not every game will successfully communicate its intent to every reader. Not every intent is going to be successful in play. Not every game's intention will actually manifest, even with people who are actually implementing the mechanics as intended. This can cause disruption at the table. The game says it's going to be fast and furious fun, but is actually a tedious bore. For example, you're doing everything right, and yet the game just doesn't work for you or anybody that you know, and so on and so on and so on. At the same time, people might be having a blast with a game you absolutely hate, or hate a game you absolutely love. How does this happen if the game mechanics are the same, frozen in time, printed on the page? A certain amount of this is in the hands of the reader and their ability to interpret and apply what was meant. Fantasy Flight game Star Wars Roleplaying is pretty ambitious in what it attempts, because not only is it introducing on a large scale a mechanic which had only been seen once before in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd Edition, and they were attempting to blend two different schools of thought, what we could call the old school and the new school. If you're new to gaming, none of this will be very important to you or make a lot of sense, but briefly, the game is really an admirable blend of traditional gaming logic with newer ideas. And all aspects of the game are tuned to aid a group in playing Star Wars, no matter what kind of scene it is. So whether that be a tense negotiation, or a combat scene, or a dramatic escape, the game, both in its mechanical bits, its traditional mechanical bits, and in its narrative elements, is working in harmony, bringing in both of these poles to produce the experience. Now, this is not easy for everybody. Some people have a broad experience with different types of games, old and new. Many people don't. Many people were raised on completely new school games and find they lack the experience of managing a system with moving parts like this. Whereas people who are used to very clear, or maybe not so clear, but at least, firm rules for things, find the vagueness of rules aimed more at shaping a narrative or a resolution difficult to deal with. I'll give you an example. Range in the game is not defined in terms of meters, but rather in terms of what can happen between two characters. This can be seen as problematic by people who are used to playing on a grid with miniatures and knowing exactly what the distances are before they make a decision about what they're going to do. Likewise, someone who is used to simply describing a scene and describing how characters interact find this range system to be really easy to use. Right? An example of the game's structured play would be taking damage. You're hit by blaster fire, you apply a certain amount of damage, your wound threshold, is affected. An example of a narrative mechanic in the game is to say, when characters are under pressure, it's appropriate for the game master to apply strain. Now in the damage example, you know exactly how much damage to apply. The base damage of the weapon, which is static, plus the number of successes rolled to hit. There's no ambiguity there. There's no room for interpretation. It never changes. But how much strain should you apply when the characters are under emotional pressure? Whatever the game master seems to feel is appropriate, in concert with how the group is interacting around the table. How does the character who's being affected by that strain, how important does that seem in the presentation done by the player? How worried are they? How much do they fear what's coming? How much stress are they displaying? Apply strain accordingly. Once you get the hang of it, this mix of clarity and structured vagueness enables the players to develop their ability to improvise, develop their ability to manage a system at high speed in chaos, make rulings in the absence of rules, apply rules correctly. It's all good. It's a way for the novice gamer to cease to be one, to become a more skilled gamer. And it's a way for an experienced gamer to reassess the things that they do and find new and interesting and exciting ways to do things, to trust themselves more. The game supplies the net. Right? The structured play supplies the net. The narrative side of the game gives you the high-flying stunts and action that's so necessary for the Star Wars universe. And the two things working in tandem, as they do throughout the whole system, guides you to the sort of play which makes the group feel like they've just been in a Star Wars adventure. Let's talk about cost. Let's not use specific numbers because they seem to vary widely from different online resources and at friendly local game stores. So just in terms of what is needed to get going. Quite honestly, regardless of what people might say, what is needed to get going is one of the core books. And if you're interested in having physical dice, the dice. That's it. If you're not interested in having the physical dice, you can use the $5 dice app, which will incidentally give you access to a dice roller for normal polyhedrals and every Star Wars themed game that Fantasy Flight Games produces, including X-Wing, Armada, Imperial Assault, that sort of thing. You could do it that way, or you could play online in Hangouts and use one of the free dice rollers that work in that format to get a taste of what the dice do and then decide if you're interested in them. So one core book and maybe the dice, maybe an app, maybe playing online to use a free dice roller, or alternately, you could use standard dice and reference the charts, which would be slow, as we've discussed, or you could, print out the symbols and doctor your dice. Lots of different options for getting involved at low cost. Now, there's no PDF support for the line, which means that the bare minimum you'll need to get the core book. As we mentioned, this is a 400-pager, hardcover, full gloss, art everywhere, very text heavy, small font. There's a lot of information in the game. I got mine for the high 40s. I've seen it online for as much as 60. I've seen it for as low as 30 something. There are used copies which appear in places like eBay. The cost of entry can be quite low. If shipping is a problem, you don't have a local game store that you can access, you live far away, like I live in Korea, very, very far away from any place that would sell me this book, then there are other options such as Book Depository, which ship internationally with no additional shipping fees, sometimes at discounted prices. So cost of entry is really no different than any other game, unless from your perspective a game is a $9 PDF or a $5 PDF or a pay what you want PDF, something like that. You can game very, very cheaply. However, what we are talking about is a licensed property that comes with a certain amount of costs, and we're talking about a high quality product. So if you compare it to some of the leading games on the market, the games that most people are aware of and most people buy, cost tends to be lower. Okay, that's really all I want to say about the minimum end of things. The maximum. People will, of course, go in whole hog. There seem to be a large number of people in our community that like to collect or like to have every aspect or learn more or go for that whole completeness thing. I've certainly been one of those people for most of my gaming life. Should we assume that that's Fantasy Flight Games' intention for the Star Wars line? From one point of view, of course we should. They're a business. They're in the business of selling things to gamers. So, yeah, they would love it if you bought every single thing that they sold. However, from a practical standpoint, that's not a way that a company engenders love of its fans, nor can they really afford to produce the quality of material that they have been and maintain 3 lines. In fact, already, now that the 3 lines are in full swing, we've seen a decrease in editorial oversight. The quality of the writing is still good. The quality of the insights that the supplements provide is still very good. But proofreading has slipped, and that's sad considering how gorgeous the books otherwise are. The core books are still of an extremely high level of quality. They're not without their editorial flaws, but it's in the supplements that we're starting to see the strain on the company, and it's that which gives us good insight into maybe what their plan is, meaning that each line, Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny, will be recycling material from the other lines, which vastly reduces the need of the consumer to buy every supplement that ever gets produced. What I'm trying to communicate is that the lines are going to eventually have the species, the gear, the locations that have appeared in the other lines. You don't need it all. You only need what applies to your actual game. As I hope has long ago been obvious, I like this game. I feel it is a good game. High quality product in most cases, more so in the core books than in the more recent supplements. But I wouldn't say that there are more typographical errors in Fantasy Flight Games products than you would see in other game lines. Far fewer. It's just sad to see them appear. The game itself has given my group an incredible amount of fun. Interacting with the system as a system has been fun. Being able to explore the characters that we created easily and quickly and have them endure through 2 years of incredible adventure has been very rewarding. And at the same time, what was a group of strangers has become a group of friends. Now, I mentioned bias in game design and presentation earlier. There are, of course, always biases in reviews. I have had fun with a great group of role players while learning a game that is targeted at gamers like me. So I am predisposed to like this game. I also am the type of gamer who will dig into the system to figure out how it works. I'm not easily daunted by a lot of text. I'm willing to experiment, and I like discovering novelty in game design. For all of these reasons, I would want to like Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars Roleplaying. In addition to those biases, in addition to those reasons, as I go through the system and look at how it hangs together, how it works, how it affects play at the table, how it influences decision making, how it aids campaign creation, character creation, and bolsters the improvisational ability of its players, and supports the idea of an emergent story, I find myself needing to highly recommend it anyway. So I hope this very long review has been worthwhile. If you have been dissuaded from trying the game, I hope this in some way will encourage you to change your mind, and that if you do change your mind and try the game, you like it as much as we do. May the Force be with you.